great to see you. Come on in. Welcome to Alive. So, okay. Would you consider yourself to be a normal person? I'm making tea. Do you want tea? Okay. I'd say most of the time I consider myself to be a relatively normal person. But then I remember that I'm a 51-year-old eccentric bachelor who has elected to live entirely alone, off-grid, in the woods, halfway up a mountain like some bald woodland cryptid. And I think, maybe not so much. I ask because, there's a lot of talk about neurodivergence lately, autism especially, and, the way that people who think or communicate differently relate to the rest of us. Here's your tea. And I know that Blue's Clues had a really profound impact on the autistic community, and I've always wanted to know why. And anyway, everyone's different, right? Unique. So it's not always so easy to tell who's neurodivergent anyway. And what does the term even mean, And also, who gets to decide what's normal? What do you think? Okay. Let's go. Okay. All right. So, Desiree Jones is an associate professor of psychology and director of the SHINE Lab. That stands for Stigma, Human Interaction, and Neurodivergent Experiences at the University of Maryland. Before that, she was a President's Postdoctoral Fellow, which sounds incredibly official to me. She started at Wellesley studying both neuroscience and psychology. Apparently, one brain degree wasn't enough. Then she went on to the University of Texas at Dallas for a master's in applied cognition and neuroscience, followed by a PhD in psychological sciences. Some people collect Funko Pops. Desiree collects diplomas, apparently. Her research is about autism, stigma, and intersectionality, basically all the ways in which society decides who's normal and who isn't. And in 2023, she landed on the Forbes 30 under 30 science list, which is to say she's one of those extraordinarily accomplished people who is also simultaneously very, very young and therefore totally intimidating to me. She's here. Hey, how you doing today?
Hi, Steve. I'm doing really great. I'm so glad that I could catch you.
I am so excited that you're here. You're so kind to join us. Now, do I call you Desiree or do I call you Desi?
Yeah, I go by Desi usually, especially with friends. And yeah, hopefully we can be friends.
Are we friends? We're friends.
I hope so. I hope I can tell everyone I'm friends with you, Steve. I think that would earn me a lot of credibility.
Listen, you came over to my window. You're willing to talk to me about stuff I don't know anything about, and you're super cool and super nice, and we're totally friends. And
all right.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So, full disclosure, this is not a topic I know a whole lot about, but it is something I would like to know a whole lot about, in part because of my former job. And we can get into that, but before we get too far, I want to talk about this term neurodivergence, because it's something I hear all the time. We all hear all the time. I hear a lot of people say it, but I feel like people mean a lot of different things. When I'm not sure everyone's talking about the same thing. So what do you think it is?
Yeah, so I think you can't really talk about neurodivergence without talking about this broader topic of neurodiversity, right? Mm-hmm. So starting at the basic building blocks for that, this is something I talk a lot about with students and things like that, because, a lot of people are interested in learning about this. But basically, if you think about the world, I think one of the things that makes it so beautiful is that we're all different from each other. We have people, different races, different backgrounds, different heights, ages, things like that. Neurodiversity applies that idea to our brains. It's kind of a framework looking at, different types of brains. So you have neurotypical people. These are people whose brains function in what's seen as like a typical way. Society was kind of built around their needs. The way that they process the world and respond to things and behave is seen as like typical behaviors within like a culture or the world around us. People whose brains process things a little differently might behave a little differently from those norms. They're called neurodivergent. So
I see.
This is a pretty broad term for a lot of people. I think, like you were saying, a lot of people can define it differently. So sometimes you might see it used to define really only like developmental conditions like autism and ADHD especially. I'm an autism researcher. I have ADHD, so those are kind of in my framework. But, if you think about it, people with things like mental health conditions, mental illness, that also affects how you experience the world, how you process things. People with anxiety or depression or schizophrenia, and they're often judged for their behaviors and in need of like extra supports and things like that. And then you can even go as far as talking about people with acquired things like people who have had strokes, things like that. That affects the brain, that affects how you experience the world around you and respond. So I think that I'm not trying to gatekeep, neurodiversity and neurodivergence. I think that, if a person is experiencing these difficulties, they're kind of common across these different types of conditions, then I think it's fine to label yourself as neurodivergent.
Right on. I like what you were saying. What I'm hearing you say, at least certainly in the beginning of that, is it's less about difference and more about the same sort of diversity that is part of human diversity, right? Like in a way, when you think of neurodiversity, it's like biodiversity. This is a function of the human condition. There is diversity, right? So of course there is neurodiversity, right?
I do just want to say one thing. I think that a lot of times people will take that diversity thing and kind of run with it and say, oh, it's not a disability, then everyone's a little autistic or things like that. But it also can be very disabling because of the social structures that we have in our world.
What are some ways in which it might actually be a strength, like in school or in work or in a relationship or something?
One of the big things is because you can think differently, because you're neurodivergent, you can be really creative oftentimes. So a lot of neurodivergent people find that they really excel at creative things like the arts or being organized and following a routine, and they can be really good at things like programming because of that.
Is there sort of a dynamic of trade-off involved in that? If there's, a hyper-focus and a hyper-utility in one area, does that ever mean there's a deficit somewhere else?
I'd say that one of the biggest problems with hyperfocus is that it can, it doesn't necessarily create deficits, but it can create problems in social relationships. If you're, really excited and enthusiastic about something, you're really into it, you want to talk about it a lot to someone. I'm someone who's a big talker, but they're just not interested. They're like very bored and, they're like, oh my gosh, this person is still talking about this, and that can make it difficult to form relationships. And that's often a response that neurodivergent people often receive. Another thing is if you're, too into something, it can mean, you have an aspect of perfectionism. So maybe you're, really detail oriented. You're like, I want to find all of the research about this area for this project and get it perfect. But then it's hard to meet deadlines and things like that.
Oh yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, I live off grid in a house halfway up a mountain, I am an introvert's introvert, and it does feel at times, it's not that I don't prefer to be around people, it's that I cannot. There are times where functioning around people would be not really an option almost. It's hard to describe, but I feel like you know what I'm talking about.
I do, and I think this is really common for neurodivergent people. So it's something, they call it autistic burnout for autism. But a lot of it's because, I don't know, maybe you can relate to this, or maybe people at home can relate to this. It's like when you're interacting with people, you can't always be fully yourself, right? Maybe you can think of a situation where you've had to kind of perform for people, like you're meeting a partner's parents for the first time, or you're at an interview, or you're a guest on a podcast. So, you feel like you have to be your best version of yourself. Neurodivergent people feel like that pretty much like all the time in all of their interactions. They're taught to like hide who they are. It's called masking.
Yeah. Tell me about masking.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a sometimes conscious, sometimes just automatic response to a lot of the stigma and discrimination and social challenges that neurodivergent, especially autistic people face. So they might, make an effort to sit up straight, change the tone and volume of their voice. They might have like a script that they follow in conversations to make it more comfortable for them. They're basically altering their social kind of abilities and social performance to better fit in and gain acceptance. Like I said, it can be completely non-conscious though, but it can lead to a lot of challenges, right? It's exhausting, not being able to be yourself around people.
Oh my goodness. I mean, neurotypical, neurodivergent, I think everyone can relate to the weight of that feeling,
Yeah, exactly.
Why does it seem like diagnoses are rising so fast? Is it because that it is more common, or is it because there's more focus on it?
We do see that, diagnoses are rising. In large part, this is really because we've gotten much better at diagnosing people. So I think we've gotten better at detecting autism earlier, so they can do it at like 2 to 3 years of age pretty reliably now. We're also getting better at diagnosing it in populations that, don't fit the kind of standard stereotypical model. So
like what?
It was frequently white males, like little boys. There used to be a 4-to-1 gender ratio. And then autistic people of color, a lot of people of color have been misdiagnosed as having like behavioral conditions first. And then they later go on to get an autism diagnosis. They've also made some changes around the diagnosis of autism. So there used to be separate conditions, like maybe you've heard of Asperger's syndrome. That's now under this umbrella of autism. But until 2013, it was a separate diagnosis.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. So the days are getting shorter and darker, and people are starting to hunker down and get kind of weird and hairy. And some people do get very depressed around this time, especially with the holidays coming up. And this November, BetterHelp is encouraging everyone to just check in, to reach out and connect with each other. And if there's something I've learned for the last couple of years, it's just how powerful simply checking in can be. So this month, don't wait to reach out. Whether you're just checking in on a friend or reaching out to a therapist for yourself, BetterHelp makes it easier to take that first step. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/SteveAlive. That's betterhelp.com/SteveAlive. The older I get, the more obvious it is to me how important friendships are. Someone who knows your favorite movie or that embarrassing song that you love, or someone who knows how to get on your nerves in a way that you secretly like. But they might not always know how to really help us when we need it most. And whether you're trying to get out of that rut or trying to deal with that messy relationship, it's important to remember our friends are not licensed therapists. But ZocDoc can help. ZocDoc gives you an easy way to find and book the perfect therapist for you. And we're not just talking about therapist appointments. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare all types of in-network doctors and click instantly to book your appointment. And once you find the right doctor, you can see their actual appointment openings and choose a time and slot that work for you and instantly book a visit. So stop putting off all those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/alive to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/alive. ZocDoc.com/alive. Tell me more about that, about why girls in particular and people of color so often get missed in their diagnosis until later in life. What's that about?
Yeah, so a lot of research has shown that a lot of this can be attributed to stigma, just both kind of stereotypes about what autism looks like, and then also some bias in providers.
What biases are you talking about specifically?
There's a bias about like Black families. So they were making judgments on family structures, like maybe both parents are working and, the kids being taken care of in daycare or things like that, or they're not in like a traditional preschool, things like that, or, the provider kind of making judgments about behaviors that might be typical for Black children versus white children. There was another study where they kind of, it wasn't actual kids, but they gave a description of like behaviors that were atypical. And they asked students to like identify a diagnosis. When they labeled the kid as white, the students were more likely to say that kid was autistic versus if the kid was labeled as Black, students usually attributed it to like, it's called oppositional defiant disorder or like behavioral conditions.
What is oppositional defiance disorder?
Yeah, so that's a disorder that's diagnosed often in childhood, and it's really, kind of having these defiant behaviors. So it's, kind of doing not what you're told, or these externalizing, acting out types of behaviors. So it's like kids who might be very resistant in nature, or kids who might have hitting and behaviors like that.
So I want to be clear. So this paper determined or found that later in life, someone who might have been dismissed as having, oppositional defiance disorder actually met the criteria for autism.
Yes, there have been several studies that have shown that, Black children are more likely to have more diagnoses before reaching the autism diagnosis as kind of their final diagnosis, more time to reach an autism diagnosis, so they're diagnosed at a later age, and then, more misdiagnoses at first, so things like ADHD or behavioral difficulties.
That does sound like bias. For sure.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of why we talk about that. For girls, it can be a little more complicated. And, again, this can also relate to people of color and stuff. We think that girls might mask more. So, maybe they're able to fly under the radar. Yeah. So that can be a thing. Maybe, doctors aren't as good at recognizing when someone's masking. That's often also the case with like Black autistic people. They're taught to mask and conceal their behaviors to protect themselves. So that can make it harder, on top of these biases, just some of these differences in what a behavior might look like in these assessments.
I wonder if young girls are sort of asked to mask anyway, so they might be good maskers.
Yeah, and when we look at autistic girls, we do see like, first of all, girls are kind of socialized to play with toys like dolls and stuff like that, and those are some of the tools we use in the like autism diagnostic assessment that seems like the gold standard. It's called the ADOS. So maybe they're more likely to be interested in those social toys, or another study showed that, autistic girls often have interests that are like more typical, but they're just really intense in nature. Whereas autistic boys might be more interested in kind of more obscure types of things. Interesting.
Do queer and autistic identities overlap in similar ways, that are meaningful for belonging, support, and everything else?
Yeah, so this unfortunately is an area that's like very much pretty new in research. There wasn't a lot of focus on LGBTQ plus autistic people. They were kind of just, like I said, autism research was very like homogenous for a while. So I think one thing that's really interesting that's come out of it is that a lot more autistic people are transgender or non-binary compared to the general population.
Really?
And yeah, so even, within people who I've worked with in my studies, I don't aim to recruit for that, but in my dissertation, like I want to say like close to a third of people identified as non-binary, and there's a theory that maybe autistic people, don't perceive these gender norms in the same way because, of their differences in thinking. It might be something like that. It might, we haven't really, I think the research is just kind of getting started in it, and trying to figure this out. But yeah, a lot of autistic people do identify as trans or non-binary.
I would love to read about that. That is really interesting research. Yeah. So they're thinking perhaps they don't perceive gender in the same way, and then
Yeah.
also don't apply that perception to themselves.
I think we find a similar thing for like being asexual or aromantic. That's also higher prevalence for neurodivergent people. So, maybe they also, it could be a brain thing. It could be kind of a combination of like brain and like socialization. There's not enough research really to say what the cause of this is. We're just, seeing this consistent pattern of, different ways of thinking about things like gender and sexuality in autistic people.
You said asexual and aromantic. What is the distinction between those two?
So when we think about asexuality, that's really referring to sexual desire. So, it's not about sexual behaviors. Some asexual people aren't sexually attracted to people. They don't form those sexual attractions. Some people call themselves like demisexual. So that means that they only form, these, again, sexual attractions to certain people, like once they've known them a little better. In terms of aromantic, that's, again, that kind of like attachment behavior. So when you're in a romantic relationship, I think the big way to distinguish this is, you can think of like casual hookups. That would be like sexuality, sexual behaviors, sexual attraction. Whereas like a romantic relationship, that would be, that romanticism. You can have a relationship, a very successful relationship with someone that's romantic where you don't engage in sex or sexual behaviors for whatever reason. Just like you can have sex without that romantic attachment.
Yes, I was about to ask if that was possible. Asking for a friend, of course. But what is the double empathy problem? This is something that I hear a lot about in this conversation.
When we look at research, there are a lot of studies looking at interactions between autistic and non-autistic people and comparing them to interactions between, just two autistic people or two non-autistic people. And interestingly, a lot of this research shows that, when you have two autistic people, they don't have a lot of these difficulties in their interactions. They can understand each other better, understand what they're saying, what they're expressing, and they get along a little better in these interactions. They rate them pretty positively. If autistic people just had broad social deficits, you wouldn't expect that, right? You'd expect two autistic people to, have a really poor interaction, and that's not what we're seeing in research. Many times these two autistic people get along, just as well as two non-autistic people and can communicate just as effectively. So the double empathy problem is really saying that it's not just autistic people having trouble understanding and empathizing with non-autistic people. It's a two-sided thing. Non-autistic people also have trouble, understanding and interpreting autistic communication.
Right. So how can we do that? How can we better interpret and understand the autistic community?
I think the biggest thing is just getting to know and kind of understand autistic people around you. So we have some research and we've looked at how people kind of perceive autistic people, like the stereotypes they have. We call it like first impressions. We show a 10-second video of autistic people. Sometimes we don't even say that they're autistic. We ask people, what do you think of this person? Like, would you hang out with them? Those types of things. And we find that people who have more knowledge about autism and also have, more firsthand experience with autistic people, both of those things are associated with rating autistic people better. So I think just, being able to, whether you have autistic friends or, you follow people who are autistic online, you can learn to understand them just like you can, learn to understand how your friend from a different culture might express themselves differently. So I think that social contact and, interacting with and learning from and listening to autistic people is a really important component of that.
Yeah, that's what I found in my lived experience. I have some autistic friends, I think we all do. And that's what I found. It's just like, it's just a slightly different code. I get it,
Yeah.
And listening has been a big part of that.
Yeah.
So why do you think people still assume that autism means lack of empathy?
One thing that I found was really common was that people often learned about autism from, like TV shows and things like that. And I think if you think about autistic characters that are represented, it's often like a very small range of different people. There's much more diversity in actual autistic people. So you often see this kind of like Asperger's phenotype where it's like a white guy who's like really socially awkward, but like really smart and talented. So, common ones are like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory or the guy in The Good Doctor. Or you can see that savant type of thing where people really struggle with the social connection, like Rain Man, which is it's been actually a really harmful stereotype for many autistic people to overcome. So I think that's one of the problems. Autistic people have often been portrayed as like aloof and cold, when in reality, many autistic people avoid interactions because they've faced so much discrimination and bullying and things like that, and have had so many negative experiences. So they might withdraw a little bit, be hesitant to form some of these interactions. But it doesn't mean they don't want friends.
Right. And I'm sure that just, creates more masking and more anxiety, and it just creates that cycle back and forth because of the double empathy problem going over around and around.
Yep.
Do you think the stigma is shrinking, or is it just kind of morphing into subtler forms?
I think that especially recently, we've had a lot of efforts to increase autism awareness, and that's been really effective. So a lot of people know what autism is, at least on a very basic level, but we certainly have a ways to go. There have been especially many very recent dialogues about autism that are very dangerous and harmful, saying things like that autistic people can never do like all of these things, like they can never play baseball, they can never have a meaningful life. All that's very stigmatizing, and it's just like a vast overgeneralization. And it's also dangerous because it kind of says that a person's value is tied to their abilities, which I think is a really harmful notion. So it's something we see a lot too. And I mean, the term for it is ableism, discrimination based on ability. And that's still really common. We see it in the workplace. We see it in romantic relationships, friendships. One of the biggest things we find consistently in our relationship is that non-autistic people are really reluctant to form relationships with autistic people. They have a much reduced interest in that compared to, friendships with people with other conditions.
Why do you think that is?
I think part of it, is, again, these kind of misinterpretations of autistic communication. Oftentimes people might interpret an autistic person as being disinterested or awkward or things like that. And they're less interested in forming friends with them because of that. One interesting thing is that we only really see that for non-autistic people. If I show videos of autistic people to other autistic people, they'll still rate them as awkward, things like that. But they don't have that reduced social interest, which suggests that, neurodivergent or especially autistic people might not use that, might not put as much weight on that when they're forming friends. It's like, I can be friends with someone who's awkward or things like that. That's not a barrier for us. Whereas it might be a big barrier for a lot of, neurotypical people.
Yeah, a lot of it is about, seeing past your assumption of the cue that you're reading, I remember I was dating someone who had ADHD, and for a while I was like, this person is just being very rude, and I was misinterpreting a lot of stuff, and I was like, and then I figured out what was going on, and we talked and we communicated, and it was cool, but that was on me, I was making an assumption there.
That's a fantastic way of putting it. I think a lot of this research has come out showing, for my dissertation, I interviewed autistic people about their social experiences. And one thing that really came out of it was that people were very frequently misinterpreted. So autistic women said that people often said that they had like resting bitch face and thought that they were really angry and things like that all the time. Black autistic people said that they felt like they had to be really conscious of their behaviors so they weren't interpreted as aggressive or, lazy, or a lot of these stereotypes. And then just in addition to that, a lot of autistic people just felt like people, even who were close to them, didn't understand them, their motives, their intentions.
It's starting to get legitimately cold up here in the mountains. And whenever that happens, I tend to just reach for clothes that I know will be reliably comfortable, awesome, and warm. And for me, increasingly, that's Quince. Their stuff is amazing. And the bonus part is, makes great gifts too this holiday season. They have these $50 cashmere sweaters that feel much more expensive than that. I think many of my friends will be receiving those, and they've got you covered beyond clothes for gifts as well. How you doing? Have you begun shopping? No? Have you done anything yet? They've got home, bath, kitchen, travel, all kinds of stuff. So give and get timeless holiday staples this season with Quince. Go to quince.com/alive for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/alive. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/alive.
Yeah, one thing you said that really struck me was this masking around policing. Because you don't want your behavior to be misinterpreted. You don't want to have a misinterpreted neurodivergent behavior compounding a bias in that moment. That does sound particularly fraught. So a lot of this sounds like it's on, or the double empathy problem, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think is really fascinating, means that both sides have to try,
Yes.
and how can we accommodate and even advocate without alienating?
Yeah, so I think that changes are needed, both on an individual level. I've talked a lot about increasing our understanding of autistic ways of communication, reducing our stigma towards autism, so being more accepting and accommodating. But I also think we need some structural changes to help autistic people, right? So one thing that's really helpful is like increased flexibility. Mm-hmm. So, being more flexible with your friends if, maybe they're not feeling a social interaction, maybe they're not feeling like going out, maybe they're autistic or neurodivergent, they're just really burnt out, they'd rather stay in or just like have some time to themselves, I think oftentimes we get labeled as flaky for canceling, and, it can be tough, but, having that flexibility. I also think just communicating your expectations socially. So, knowing, kind of laying out, being direct about what you're expecting of someone. Like we had like a seminar here and we were kind of talking about like norms, social norms, and we were writing them out and we were saying like how many of these are actually necessary in a social interaction. And we realized like very few of them were actually necessary, but they were often things that are used to kind of stigmatize or exclude neurodivergent people. Like eye contact is a good one. Like, it can be helpful for non-autistic neurotypical people to like read emotions from someone's eyes, but is that really necessary? Listen to the words they're saying. In many cases, that'll tell you exactly what you need to know about how they're feeling. Ask them.
What would you say to a parent who's wondering how to prepare their autistic child, to enter a world mm-hmm. that often confuses diversity for disorder?
I think that this is a really tough thing for a lot of parents, especially because, autism is a spectrum and, some people's kids can have really high support needs where, they might require round the clock type of help with, daily living and different types of skills, a lot more support. Whereas, some people's kids may achieve independence and need less of that support. So things can look very different for different parents of different autistic people, just like they can look, different for parents of neurotypical people, right? With that in mind, I think there are like 3 things that are really important for helping to prepare your autistic child for the world. And that's acceptance, advocacy, and love. So what I mean by acceptance is, accepting your child for who they are, especially who they are now, not who you hope they'll be in the future. I think parents can pretty commonly expect things of their kids or hope for things of their kids, but, I think just appreciating who they are now in the moment, they have value, they're your kids. So just, accepting them for who they are now, kind of regardless, again, of that ability level or, challenges they might face and things like that. Advocacy is also really important. So many parents have to advocate for their kid kind of throughout their life in school, getting them the supports they need. There's something called an IEP in school that's really helpful for many disabled kids. Also things like, pushing your doctor to, get a certain support like therapy or something, or even just getting that initial autism diagnosis. If your kid has the ability, teaching them to advocate for themselves, right? That kind of thing. And then finally, I think love is pretty self-explanatory, right? But what I mean by that is just like giving your kid a space to know that they belong, they're valued, they're accepted. So as a neurodivergent kid, like this was really helpful for me. I was a weird kid. Like I got obsessed with Matt Damon for like 3 years. I was
Weird about
always
that.
doing
Matt
like
Damon's great. He's a great actor.
It was like too
He's a
much.
nice guy from Boston. He wrote Good Will Hunting.
Yeah.
When he was younger than you, I think.
You don't have to tell me. Like I was obsessed with him to the point that I was like actively bullied for this. But
Really?
like I was a weird kid. So yeah, but my parents were just like whatever. And the point is like I was weird as a kid and not in like a really cute way. Like oftentimes in a way that got me picked on or people thought I was like genuinely weird. But
Same.
I never felt that way with my parents. Oh, I'm sorry, and it's tough, right? Especially with other kids, because it's like,
I'll tell you, Desi,
I'm just being myself here.
Yeah, being bullied. I always say, being bullied when I was young, it's difficult for me to think of anything that was more formative in my life. And it still shapes my perceptions to this day. I am still aware of the way in which I was fired in that particular crucible, It's still, it's had a profound impact, I think, on anyone who's experienced it, And you were really into Matt Damon. I wanted to be a mime.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You became a performer, so I think it worked out in the end,
Yeah. I guess I was asking for it in a way.
I was like the kid who corrected the teacher and like, that doesn't make you a lot of friends, or like reminding the teacher, like, you forgot to give us homework. Like a very
that'll
big
get you
know-it-all.
bullied. Desi, that'll get you bullied.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow. That's strong coffee.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little about neurodivergence and emergent technologies. Now we're all relating through screens all the time, right? Well, you and I are relating through that right now. And how do all these screens factor in? Is it helping? Is it helpful? Is it hurtful? Like, what's up?
Yeah, so this whole issue of social media and technology can be really interesting for autistic people. So, in my dissertation, like I said, I interviewed autistic people about their social experiences. And one thing that came out, especially for Black autistic people and autistic women, was the internet was like really powerful for them. So that's where most of their friends were online, people on like Twitter, or, I had people who were like, I found people who are interested in K-pop like me. It's like been a really good tool for a lot of people to, find people who are similar to them, maybe other neurodivergent people, other people with overlapping interests. And there's a lot less social pressure than like a face-to-face interaction. So we did a study here at UMD with kids, and many of the kids said like, oh, I met like friends online through like this game I played. And, I don't really have friends in person. That said, it can also open up some trouble for neurodivergent people. So cyberbullying is something that can be really common for neurodivergent people. I think, like, especially kids who are in school, they can have videos spread around them making fun of them. When I was in high school, there was a Facebook group that was called, like, This Kid Has Asperger's Syndrome, and, like, a bunch of people were joining it, and that's really messed up. Like, why would you do that? But, that is a really common thing. Many neurodivergent people get bullied. I had someone who was in my dissertation who said, like, they used 4chan a lot, and, like, obviously they get bullied all the time on there. There's a very, like, aggressive environment on that website. So I do think it can be both. I think it also is tough because for many autistic people, those relationships that they have online, they'd like them to expand into something more. They'd like to have that face-to-face, interaction and connection, but they can't, for whatever reasons. It can sometimes be a barrier and be a little harder. They still have these unmet social needs. So I think it can be both a benefit and a challenge. I'll also just add a couple more like quick points.
Yeah, please.
2 benefits outside of relationships for these kind of online interactions are, you get more flexibility. You could go to school online or, work virtually. It does help for like accommodations for people. Maybe you just like can't go in one day, or you have a communication barrier. And then the other thing is like text-to-speech programs and assistive communication. So many autistic people don't speak with words, but they're able to communicate through like an iPad or something like that. So I think technology has been like both really great, but it can also, present some dangers.
What about the future? Where do you think this is going? Do you have hope? You seem like a very hopeful person. It seems like we're gonna learn to accommodate a little bit more. What do you think?
I like to think that, the universe is shifting towards, this balance, this acceptance for, everyone. We're seeing over time, we are becoming more accepting of differences. I think that with the way that the world is now, it's so global. You have to be accommodating of people who are different from you and accepting to things, whether it's people from different cultures, different backgrounds, or, people with different brains. So I'm really hopeful towards that. I've been in autism research for, I guess, like almost 10 years now, and I've already seen a big change, not just within, the field in general, but within my own work and my own understanding, my own interactions with autistic collaborators and students and, even participants who I'm talking to. And every person who I talk to, I walk away from that conversation having learned something. So I think that's really cool. And I really just believe in the best in people, so I really do think that it's going to get better. I've seen it getting better for a lot of autistic people I know. And yeah, I know that a lot of them, they say it's not great now, but like they also have hope for the future. And, I hope that we can kind of shift our understanding of autism to be more accepting, because regardless of a person's ability level, things like that, if we reduce stigma, we can make their life a little better, right?
Fantastic. I love talking to an optimist. Desi, thank you so much for stopping by the window and talking to us. This was really fascinating. I could talk to you for hours, and I really learned a lot today. So you're great.
Thank you for having me. This has been one of the coolest things I've ever done, and it's been so nice talking to you.
Yeah, you're welcome anytime. All right. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, Desi. Bye. All right. That was exceptionally informative. I learned a lot. How about you? Yeah, right? Okay, just a few things that I wrote down. Neurodiversity is human diversity. Right. I know when I usually think of the word diversity, I think of like culture and language and even like food. But of course that applies to our brains too. That makes sense. Difference isn't necessarily deficit. There are, in fact, circumstances in which the things that make us different are also the things that make us strong. And the last thing I wrote is she said, acceptance, advocacy, and love are things that a neurodivergent child might need. And it sounds to me like those are the things that all human beings need. We just need them differently. Yeah. Let's go outside. Neurodiversity is human diversity. That one resonates with me. Because we're all unique, right? And if we're all unique, doesn't that mean being unique is normal? Could it be that difference itself is the most human part of us? I don't know. What do you think? Yeah. Well, thanks for coming by. It means a lot. It's always great to see you. Really. You look great. Live with Steve Burns is a Lemonada Media original. If you haven't subscribed to Lemonada Premium yet, now's the perfect time. You can listen to the show completely ad-free, plus you'll unlock exclusive bonus content from me as I reflect on this episode. Just press subscribe on Apple Podcasts, head to lemonadapremium.com to subscribe on any other app, or listen ad-free on Amazon Music with your Prime membership. That's lemonadapremium.com. Alive is hosted by me, Steve Burns, and produced by Jeremy Slutskin. Our editor is Christopher Champion Morgan. Our associate producer is Akshaz Tharabailu. Audio engineering by James Sparber. Lemonada's SVP of weekly programming is Steve Nelson. Executive producers are Jessica Cordova-Kramer, Stephanie Whittles-Wax, and me. We'll see you next week. And you look great, by the way.